Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again to Brain Gist. I started talking about a condition called multiple sclerosis in my last video, and I hope to continue today. In that video, I introduced what multiple sclerosis is. I talked about what happens in people who have multiple sclerosis. I talked about the symptoms and signs of this condition. And now I will be going forward today in this discussion by talking about the cause of multiple sclerosis. I believe not many doctors will disagree with me if I say that multiple sclerosis has become common today. Let's say 2-3 decades ago, it wasn't very common, but nowadays it has become a central part of neurological practice. So very often see patients with multiple sclerosis. And I guess there's probably no neurologist practicing that would not have seen a few cases of multiple sclerosis or have some that they care for personally. So I've got quite a number of patients with multiple sclerosis that I personally care for. So I think it is a common disease, and that's why we need to talk about it. So now, what causes multiple sclerosis, or MS for short? Unlike stroke, that you can say the cause of stroke in a particular individual is high blood pressure or diabetes, in multiple sclerosis, we cannot pinpoint a single causative risk factor and say there's a cause and effect relationship between this particular condition and multiple sclerosis, or this particular risk factor and multiple sclerosis. But we think it's actually an interplay of multiple factors. It's an interaction between genetics and the environment. So people would have to have been innately or genetically predisposed to developing immune conditions like multiple sclerosis, and then when they get exposed to certain environmental factors, then these two interact to bring about the causation of multiple sclerosis. So there are certain risk factors that we think if one possesses these risk factors, one has a higher risk, and the more of these risk factors one has, the higher the risk that one would come down with multiple sclerosis. But then does that mean that everyone who has those risk factors will develop multiple sclerosis? No. And that is why we cannot say it's a direct or a straightforward relationship. So we think it's a complex relationship that's not easy to predict. So these risk factors will include age. Now, the majority of people who develop multiple sclerosis are between the ages of 20 and 40 years old. So this doesn't mean that if you are outside this age bracket, you cannot develop multiple sclerosis. If you look at my immediate past video, I did talk about a lady who developed multiple sclerosis at the age of 19. And then there are people who've been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis outside or after the age of 40. But definitely the majority of people who will be diagnosed with multiple sclerosis are within this age group 20 to 40. Then number 2 is sex. Now, women are much more likely than men to develop multiple sclerosis. The risk is about 2 to 3 times higher in women than it is in men. Now, this again is not to say that men do not develop multiple sclerosis. I have personally, excuse me, I have personally managed a lot of men who have multiple sclerosis. So men also do have multiple sclerosis, but then the risk is higher in women. Now, we also talk about ethnicity, or shall I say race. So it appears that people of Caucasian ancestry, or people who are white, have a higher risk of developing multiple sclerosis than Africans and maybe Asians and maybe people, Arabic people. Now, of course, this gap is getting narrower and narrower over time. Like a decade or 2 decades ago, the incidence gap was much higher than it is now. Now we're beginning to see more and more cases in blacks, in Africans, and in Asians, and in Arabic people. So maybe eventually, as we understand these risk factors more and more, and as time passes, maybe there's going to be a shift in how we think about multiple sclerosis risk factors. But as it is right now, we think that is the case. Now, something closely linked to that is geography. So the part of the world where you live probably also affects the risk of multiple sclerosis. Like we know that those who live very close to the equator tend to have less prevalence than those who live far away from the equator. So that's why probably Europeans would have a higher risk than Africans, for instance. Now, migration would also fit into this discussion at this point. So we believe that if children migrate to a new location with a different risk level, if they migrate before the age of 15, then they would acquire the risk for MS that is prevalent in that new location. So, but if they migrate after the age of 15, then they would carry with them the risk that is peculiar to their country of origin. Let's say an African child migrates to Europe at the age of 10. So their own risk of multiple sclerosis will be nearly the same as those who were born in Europe. But if they migrated after, let's say, 15, then they carry with them the risk that they already developed before. Now, the other risk factors will include things like smoking. So if you smoke, that slightly increases your risk of developing multiple sclerosis. But of course, this is not a direct, cause-effect relationship. Like I said, it doesn't mean every person who smokes will develop multiple sclerosis, and there are non-smokers who develop multiple sclerosis. So you have to think about these things a bit complex. It's an interplay of genetics and environment. And of course, talking about genetics, if a member of your family, not just any member, if your first-degree relation has multiple sclerosis, then that slightly increases your risk as well. And who are your first-degree relations? Your parents, your siblings. If any of them has multiple sclerosis, then your chances are probably slightly higher of developing multiple sclerosis. So now, and then more recently, evidence is emerging that people who have been exposed to infection by a virus called EBV. EBV is a short form for Epstein-Barr Virus. So these individuals have a higher risk of developing multiple sclerosis, or we're thinking that this virus probably has a causative role. But I believe, we're going to get more and more understanding of this as time passes. So these are all of the things that we think are the risk factors for multiple sclerosis. Again, it's a complex interaction between environmental factors and inherent genetic predispositions. All right, and as a round-off, I'm going to talk briefly about the various types of multiple sclerosis. And by various types, I'm referring to how the disease behaves over time. That's the natural course or natural history of the disease. Now, there are individuals who have the type that we call relapsing and remitting multiple sclerosis, RRMS. So the majority of people who are diagnosed with MS would follow this pattern. And that's a pattern where they have distinct attacks, which we call relapses, which could come in any of the forms of presentations I've talked about before. And these tend to get better over several weeks, and they return to near their previous baseline. The patients return to near their previous baseline after the attacks resolve. and then after the passage of some time, they have another attack or another relapse. So they have this relapses and remissions, you know, kind of alternating with each other over time. And then disabilities can accrue over time, and that's what we call the relapsing-remitting form. And then there are individuals who have the type that we call the primary progressive MS or multiple sclerosis. These are individuals who do not have clear, identifiable attacks from which they recover over time, unlike the RRMS, but rather these individuals continue to slowly get worse over years. They cannot pinpoint any particular time point when they develop certain symptoms, but they just realize that progressively they're getting worse and worse and worse. Some of them just realize that over a space of 3 years, they start finding it increasingly difficult to walk. Their legs are getting slowly heavy and heavy and heavy, things like that. So that's what we see in those who have primary progressive multiple sclerosis. And then the third type I'm going to talk about, which will be the last subtopic in this long video, is what we call the secondary progressive. So these are individuals that start out having the relapsing-remitting form, and then over time, after experiencing relapses and remissions for several years, maybe up to 10 years or slightly more, then they now convert to this type of progressive course where they continue to slowly get worse inexorably over time. So that's all I wanted to share today. Thank you for watching up to this stage in this similarly long video. But I do hope you learned something. Please don't forget to subscribe, share, like, comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Bye.